Welcome to the Recruitment Leadership Podcast, hosted by Alison Humphries. The Recruitment Leadership Podcast is here to help those in the recruitment industry gain awareness and understanding on the hot topics faced by those in the business of hiring people. In each episode, Alison Humphries is joined by a fellow expert to offer professional knowledge, insight and advice on the biggest subjects affecting recruitment businesses. It's the podcast to listen to for recruitment business frontrunners seeking expert information from industry-leading advisors. Welcome to the Recruitment Leadership Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Recruitment Leadership Podcast. I'm Alison Humphries of Recruitment Leadership, and my guest today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Alex Farrell. Welcome, Alex.
Hello, nice to be on.
Alex has a stellar career history. She was a board member of S3. She created the biggest tech careers platform in Europe and successfully sold that. She was a non-exec director and investor in Sourcebreaker, saw that through a very successful exit as well. And she's been an advisor on a UK government strategic review of fintech. So that's a pretty impressive history, Alex, and more about what you're doing now at Autometry in just a moment. I'd like to briefly set the scene on this. In lots of previous episodes of the Recruitment Leadership Podcast, we've been talking about that intransigent problem of productivity in the recruitment industry. We know that there's been a kind of hands hovering over buttons, if you like, for quite some time now with planned changes to employment law. There's uncertainty. And I read an interesting stat this morning from JobAdder, which mentioned that inefficiency in job filling is costing most recruiters a fortune. Something like, by their reckoning, nearly 80% of candidates who are introduced to clients by recruiters come from paid for advertising, and it's taking them on average 14.4 days longer than when they use candidates that they already know or have organic outreach. So I'm going to plant that seed. Alex, time to hand over to you. Tell us how you're seeing this productivity issue play out in medium-sized recruitment businesses, please.
Right, yes. Recruiter productivity has been stagnant for roughly 25 years, which may be a surprise to some because we've had that post-COVID bump, which was lovely for 2.5 years, where everybody had some sort of real boom years of revenue per head per recruiter. But actually, if you look at the data going back 25 years, revenue per head per recruiter has been very static, actually. When we look at the top 100 recruitment firms, it's been roughly between 93,000 and 103,000 per head per year per recruiter for about 25 years. So recruiter productivity has been pretty flat for quite some time. And that's a significant problem for medium-sized companies where headcount is their typical lever for growth. And if you look at the rising costs of running a business these days, you could argue that actually productivity has been going backwards. If it's been flat, then costs have been going up. You could say productivity is a very significant issue, and more so than ever with costs where they are.
Yeah, and I know from talking to my community that it's hitting everybody, but the amount of extra investment we're throwing in terms of things like compliance, tech, marketing is really affecting bottom line, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, so Alex, you've had this stellar career and you've founded and exited successfully numerous companies. Why do it all again? Why did you decide in 21 that the world needed Autometry?
It's a very good question. I think I'm a platform girl at heart. I build software companies, I grow them, I occasionally sell them. I particularly love work tech. It's a real passion for me. It's a great sector. It's fun building tech that solves problems around the world of talent. It's interesting and complex and fun. But I'm also very, very fond of the recruitment sector. You know, I started my career at S3 back in '96. A significant chunk of my friends have come from there, have come from recruitment. And I think it's a pretty overlooked sector. I think recruiters are the most commercial driven bunch of entrepreneurs ever. And they're a lovely bunch. So that's an area of focus for me. That's kind of where I play. Why do it all again? Good question. I think the real trigger for me starting Autometry was my recent experience with Sourcebreaker. You know, those guys built a really great bit of kit. It was a fantastic product. And they built it for the recruitment sector. Steve's an incredible entrepreneur. And actually he really understood his customer base and he built a product that worked for them. But the real trigger for me, why doing it again, was seeing how in a relatively short period of time, you could build a business, a B2B SaaS business that drove very good, very strong revenues in a business that, because it was B2B SaaS, had a nice high valuation metric at the end. So I thought, I've got one more software company in me. I want it to be a B2B SaaS business so that it has a nice exit valuation because of the sticky monthly recurring revenue. And what better sector to sell it to, which is, you know, the recruitment sector, because they're my favorite bunch of people. So that's
mine too. I love that.
That's why I want to do it all again. But the world does need Autometry, I think, because of your sort of opening remarks about productivity. You know, we've got this seriously big issue, and it's bigger than we think. You know, recruiters are adding jobs to their CRM, active jobs, open jobs that just aren't getting covered with candidates. And as you mentioned, candidates are in their database. They're adding that are never getting looked at again. And that's a serious problem because we've got sort of human capital being deployed to do these, you know, highly paid activities, yet we're not getting the value out of that data in the system. So we need to do something about that. We need to help recruiters become more productive. And we think the real issue there is it's a data issue. You know, too much data in, not well labeled, not well organized. Recruitment firms are investing in this data, but not able to get it out due to the sort of technology and data issue, which is sort of actually prohibiting them from doing it. So
yes, I recognise that pun. As long as I can remember, recruitment business owners have effectively used adding headcount to grow, and a lot of the very entrepreneurial small business owners that I know, they actually define their business by how many people they employ. So just summarize for us why you think it's time to change that approach.
It's an absolutely brilliant question, right? And there's no doubt about it. Adding heads does add revenue, but I think that sort of headcount being the lever for revenue is not what it once was. The landscape's more competitive, it's more complex, and the laws of diminishing returns have set in. So adding revenue by head is often not as profitable as it was. And recruitment's very closely tied to the economic cycle, so it's often this exhausting sort of feast or famine cycle when we add heads. You have too many of them, you've not got enough of them. The only alternative we have, though, to this headcount play is to use modern technology, you know, to supercharge productivity. And I personally believe it's the only way we can go if we want to stop this sort of add more heads to add more revenue plan. And we should, and I really mean this, be able to 5x a recruiter's revenue through the clever use of technology, rather than I'm going to add 5 times more heads to get to the same place. And for us, the secret at Autometry is to put the recruiter at the center. They are the key. You know, if you use the tech around the recruiter and optimize the recruiter to amplify their most valuable efforts, then there's a whole new playbook there for growth, which is get more revenue per head rather than more heads, you know, and it's fundamentally about tech.
So now seems like a good point, Alex, for you to describe for our listeners exactly what Autometry does that makes it significantly different from generative AI, for example.
So look, at Autometry, our vision is to supercharge recruiters' revenue, and we think by combining AI with the most valuable actions of the human, we can significantly impact, you know, their revenue per head. Me and my co-founder Nye Bidwell, we're absolutely obsessed by revenue per head, recruiter productivity, and we fundamentally believe that actually some of the key actions of the recruiters can drive significantly more revenue if we use AI to optimize it. Now, you know, if you think about where are those key actions that a recruiter can do that can drive revenue if technology amplifies it, you look at the key actions of I've added a job or I'm working a candidate. So if a recruiter adds a job and you had a magical world where an AI assistant automatically served up the best possible candidates for that job without the recruiter pressing buttons, or alternatively, if a recruiter is working a candidate and has just sent it out and the AI assistant serves up some more jobs that are relevant for that candidate without the recruiter pressing buttons, That's what we should be seeing. And that's essentially what Autometry does. We have an AI assistant that lurks in the background. Her name is Ada, and she's looking for ways to help a recruiter based on their key behavioural signals that are high value. And that's essentially...
Wow. Okay. So this sounds like recruiter utopia to me. So for years of working with business owners who have been tearing their hair out saying, I tell them they've got to do BD or spec candidates out, but they don't know where to do it. So in effect, it's giving them really rational advice about where to market this candidate. So
right, well, exactly that, right? And ultimately, there's one killer problem we've got to solve, which is how do we intelligently match candidates to jobs, to clients, or to recruiters at the optimum time. And that's essentially the problem we're solving. But biz dev is a key one. If you ask most recruitment firms, you need to win jobs at the moment. It's got a slightly, the market's toughened a bit. So winning jobs is at the top of everybody's list at the moment. How do they go about it? Most people are using an automated outreach tool. They're fishing out of the same pond as everybody else, a LinkedIn, and they're largely ignoring the really, really strong relationships that they have in their database of clients. If you think about, there is data in your system that tells us these clients are interesting for you, and it's not just you've worked with them before, but what kind of candidates they've engaged with you on, and whether they've had open jobs before. That's the kind of data that we can look at, and we can say, actually, look, there's some clients there who've previously had that kind of job, or have previously consumed this kind of CV. Maybe we can touch the recruiters and say, oh, you're working that candidate, you should consider it for John. You sent him a CV like that 14 months ago. So there is data system that we can use to go, actually, that's a really good client to match that CV to. So Nirvana is using the candidates that you're working to do your BD, but without the recruiters pressing buttons to get there.
I can see that would be a phenomenal point of differentiation when speaking to a client or a candidate, actually, that you have that capability when the rest of the market is so dependent on placing ads, even to get applications from candidates you've already got in their CRM, which makes me wince. So look, I've encountered a fair amount of cynicism about AI from experienced recruiters. Why do you think that happens?
Look, I don't blame them, right? AI is having a moment, right? And that's good, but there are a couple of major issues. And the first is that people in human-centered industries aren't particularly, enamored of the idea of machines coming and replacing humans, and I don't blame them. And the second is that, AI is this shiny new thing, but no one knows what to do with it. So if you navigate the world of AI, it's currently being used very much at a consumer level rather than an enterprise level, and it's used for incremental gain. I've got ChatGPT open. Can you anonymize this CV? Or, can you write me a clever marketing email out? So I don't, and that's good, but it's not going to fundamentally change how many interviews you've got per candidate or win you new jobs. It's going to make your day a little bit easier. It's not going to move the revenue dial. So how do we look at where you'd move the revenue dial in a recruitment firm? Well, can I increase interviews per candidate? Can I increase job coverage, CVs per job? Can I win jobs and extend and redeploy contractors? So nobody's doing the clever thinking around how AI should be applied, really. And so you've got lots of noise about AI, but nothing that fundamentally shifts the needle in the drivers around revenue. So I kind of don't blame recruiters for thinking this sounds like another bit of tech that's going to come in and solve everything. And they've heard a lot of that before, new tech, new world, solve all your problems. But I think recruiters really need to see actually how is it going to be applied and how does it shift the dial in terms of actual revenue.
So one of the areas that I found gives people a reason to hold back from AI is concern about the legal aspects of using it. I know your original degree was in law, although you've never, I think, practiced as a lawyer, but there are important legal factors to be considered if you're deploying AI in some of the ways that you described. Can you just outline the key issues for us?
Of course, yeah. So this is slightly dry. I did do a law degree, but sales and recruitment's far more fun. So I was never going to end up in a court of law. Certainly not as a lawyer. There are a couple of different things to pay attention in this area, and it's mainly around bias and automated decision making. So those are the two areas. And actually, even if recruitment firms aren't doing AI things directly in-house, they'll be using tools that are. So this is relevant to every single recruiter, right? Whether they directly tinkering or not, right? So firstly, in the EU, the EU Act is going to come into force in 2025, one of the main areas it covers is automated decision making. And this means that recruitment companies using AI-based systems will need to clearly inform candidates when AI is being used, especially around automated decision making. So that's the sort of bit they need to know about in the EU. In the US, there's been a bunch of different things happening. There's been a law in California, the CPPA released a draft of rules based around automated decision makings. Slightly different play than the EU. This says that the rules would require businesses to provide consumers with a pre-use notice around how the logic was being used. So, it's slightly different in the US and the EU in that respect. In the EU, it's like, make sure you let them know, whereas in the US, make sure you let them know and maybe give them a bit more information on how it's being used. And then actually there's another one in America, which is mainly more for sort of, I guess, technology platforms that use it rather than the end recruitment firms that use it. And this is saying that automated decision making using covered algorithms, meaning algorithms that, you can't see what's going on, they need to have an external audit done every year. So
really?
That should make recruitment firms very comfortable if the likes of, say, LinkedIn or Autometry or any of these big job boards are using AI in their systems, then we need to get audited every year. And that's in certain parts of America. Right. So there's a couple of different themes there, and it's either around, if you're using a tool that has AI in it, you may need to inform your candidates that you're using your tool or how that tool works. And there are some relatively simple solutions to this, such as having notices on company websites saying, we have tools that have some automated decision making built in. If you're not comfortable with this, please don't apply using our website, for example. But I would highly recommend, if someone's not sure on what to do next, that they have a call with the data protection officer, just to understand in each of their jurisdictions whether they're covered and what's the best way to themselves.
Okay. So it sounds like most people will be able to cover it off, for example, by just including a consent and a brief explanation in that message they're already sending, asking for consent to market. Yeah.
It depends at what point the candidate or client gives consent. So sometimes that's at the point of application, or sometimes it's at registration, etc. Consent's an active thing rather than inferred. So yeah,
Right.
I've got if anybody needs recommendations, I've got a bunch of really great people. One particularly good guy who's fantastic at this, but I would say it's definitely a call with a data protection officer to understand in the jurisdictions I'm in, because we know recruiters are fabulous at going global, so they might be in a number of different territories. In the territories I'm in, what should I be aware of, and how do I make sure I'm covered in terms of articulating it to the candidates that I'm working with? Yeah.
Okay, some sound advice there. Now, again, business owners I speak to are, to be honest, quite frightened that the whole tech and AI space is accelerating so fast that they don't know where to start. The minute they think, yes, we'll use it in this way, they find that it's out of date and there's a next generation software. Where would you say, if to anyone who's listening who hasn't yet started using AI, where would you say they ought to start?
Right, it's a big question. For me, I would actually say to stop, take a step back and approach it from the point of view of the business rather than the point of view of the tech. Lots of people are playing with AI and starting off with, this is great, what can I do with it? How can I apply it? And I would switch that round. I would start with a business objective, which is I need to increase interviews per candidate, or I want to extend my contract runners, or I want to put my recruiters on an optimum market. And I'd start with the business question, and then I'd say, and how could AI help me with that particular objective? And so I'd think of it as a way to just use it for what I need it for, rather than playing with it for the sake of it. Right. And I think the challenge is it is still very much a consumer toy for end recruiters, maybe, rather than an enterprise tool. No one's quite got to the stage yet where everybody's really understanding how I can use it to transform my business at a central level, rather than maybe just at an incremental consumer level. So I think
I see. So you're saying that, in effect, the use of it in a lot of the industry is just to save an individual recruiter some time, as opposed to re-engineering what their processes are. Is that right?
I would say that's right. So it tends to be an endpoint solution run by the individual recruiter. It's useful, but it's not going to strategically move the dial on revenue. And there is one fundamentally big reason why that's happening, and that is because recruitment firms' data is not set up to apply a strategic AI framework. And there's a quote by the CTO of Salesforce, and he says, your AI strategy is only as good as your data strategy, which we fundamentally believe. To have an AI strategy that works at the center, we need to understand that it needs a data strategy to run there too. So yeah, I would. There are two things to think about for recruitment. And what do I want to achieve as a business objective, rather than how do I play with AI, and then how does my data support that particular objective with AI?
Right. And so the data that they have will, in many cases, not be terribly useful, even if you do slap an AI platform on top of it. So we'll come back to that in just a moment. I know our listeners, Alex, will be really keen to hear about a real life case study based on a recruitment client. Can you talk us through how working with Autometry has benefited one of your subscribers, and what the challenges were that they had?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first area of focus for Autometry, back when we started a few years back, was we started with a hypothesis, which was, can we generate revenue? Because we're all about revenue. Can we generate revenue from the passive portion of a candidate database, the bit that recruiters have forgotten about, but we know there's value in? It sort of goes back to my days building a job board, because that's what job boards do. They regenerate passive candidates. So we built version 1 of the platform, and what it did was it identified candidates in the recruiters database that hadn't been spoken to in 6 months. And then so we said, right, this candidate, 6 months trigger, this candidate needs to be regenerated. And we built an automated outreach flow with some clever sort of bits in it that said, actually reached out to the candidate and said, but it reached out to the candidate from the recruiter. So not a generic marketing email or ops email from the recruiter. Said, hi there, Alison, just checking in. I've got your contact details correct, right? So it was an outreach from the recruiter, and that made it relevant to the candidate, and with a very quick check-in, your contact details correct. Candidate engaged and clicked yes, and it was a series of emails and an SMS message that went out in a flow. If the candidate said yes, we then prompted the recruiter with a tap on the shoulder in an email, a little nudge, going, "Oh, John, Alison's just confirmed her details. She's a Java developer. You last placed her last year. Do you think you should have a look at her now?" Right. So it was a nudge, but with a regenerated, warmer candidate. And we did this for 6 customers. They were all Vincere at the time, because we started with Vincere. And over the course of 12 months, this particular workflow generated an additional £875,000 of revenue for the 6 customers that
Right.
Right. And it proved to us that if you get the data lined up and the triggers lined up, and you nudge the right candidate with the right outreach, that actually what it can do is it can generate revenue from data in your system without you needing to go external, to go outside. Right. So that's the first real use case for us around how the data in your systems is highly valuable. How do we use AI prompting and then nudge the recruiters to optimize every single piece of that data at every single opportunity we get? That makes sense?
Right. Okay, so close on, £1 million worth of additional revenue generated there. Very good. Okay, you did mention one of the well-known CRMs there. Just integration is a question my listeners always ask. Are there any limitations on what Autometry will integrate with?
Yes, unfortunately there is. So, when I was building Autometry, one of the things I thought before I built it was, should I build an integration seam? Because it's very much needed. We're all badly stuck together in recruitment technology, unfortunately. But I decided to build Autometry instead. So sorry about that. So we are limited by being connected with Vincere and Bullhorn at the moment. So very, very deep connections into their systems. So that's unfortunately who we are limited to at the moment, Vincere and Bullhorn.
Right, okay. But they do actually occupy quite a large part of the recruitment market, don't they? Yes. Now, finally, Alex, I'm very excited about what Autometry will be able to do. You have kindly organised a time-limited special offer for listeners to the Recruitment Leadership Podcast. Tell us, what is it and how should people access it?
So, look, we want to help recruitment owners navigate where AI can drive value in their business. So the first thing that I would say is we're happy to offer anybody a free diagnostic to that segment of the 50 to 500 heads that gets in touch on Vincere and Bullhorn. So we'll offer a free diagnostic, and what we'll do is we'll review your key revenue drivers and your data quantity and quality to find out where AI can be applied to optimize revenue. That's the first bit. So understanding what data you've got and where the gaps are and where potentially AI can be pointed. So we're happy to give anybody in that segment a free diagnostic to just at least shed some light on what they can do with it. And then secondly, we have space for 10 companies in January to start a pilot with us, and we're offering a 30% discount to the first 5 that get in touch with us. So we'd love to hear from people in that 5 to 500 heads on Bullhorn and Vincere segment.
Right. Okay. So 2 fabulous offers. One will help you understand what value Autometry could add and what's missing in your data, and the other is actually for 10 lucky companies to run a discounted pilot. Alex, how should business owners contact you if they are interested?
Yeah, they can get in touch with me. I'm Alex at autometry.io, or Nye. Most people know Nye as well, so he's Nye at autometry.io. So either drop us an email, give us a call, and we'll go from there.
That's fabulous. Okay. Now, I know that lots of listeners will be very keen to look more closely at Autometry, which is doing something radically different. Alex, thank you so much for creating that special offer for our listeners. And thank you so much for sharing your time with us to speak today.
Oh, you're welcome.
Listeners, do tune in for the next episode of the Recruitment Leadership Podcast. Thanks to Alex Farrell of Autometry, and I'm Alison Humphries of Recruitment Leadership. Goodbye.
You've been listening to the Recruitment Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, review and share so that others can find the podcast too. We really appreciate your support. If you have any questions about the topics covered or wish to find out more about recruitment leadership, please email alison@recruitmentleadership.co.uk referencing the podcast. We're also on LinkedIn, where you can follow Recruitment Leadership and connect with Alison Humphries. Thank you for listening, and we hope you join us next time for another episode of the Recruitment Leadership Podcast.